Is that okay? Do you listen to me? Yes, it's working. Well, I'm gonna start this event on gender and climate nexus for the ITFC Pavilion. Thank you everybody for joining in the net, as well as here in the ITFC Pavilion. I wanted to start by thanking ITFC for welcoming us in this event on the gender and climate nexus. Thanking as well the 5 speakers and our chair that are both connected and here. I will introduce them little by little when it's their turn to speak. And before we get into the introduction and the opening speech, I wanted to very quickly introduce myself. I'm Marmerita Oblad. I'm working as a gender expert for AFD, for the Agence Française de Développement. I'm in charge of partnerships, communications, accountability in this feminist agency. I was in charge for the Generation Equality Forum, as well as for the gender mainstreaming during the Finance in Common Summit, and as well as for the coordination for gender equality for AFD within ITFC. And first of all, I wanted to introduce our chair for this meeting, Ms. Meral Murathan. Ms. Meral joined the TSKB, the Turkish bank, in the Treasury Department in 1998. And after serving a variety of roles and positions, she was promoted as head of financial institutions in 2012. Since 2019, Ms. Murathan has been serving as Executive VP responsible for development finance institutions, financial institutions, and investor relations, loan monitoring and engineering, as well as in technical advisory department. So, Ms. Murathan, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for chairing this event.
Thank you very much. Actually, it's a great pleasure to be here for this wonderful event. And I wish all the success to ourselves. Please let me start my words by emphasizing how the crucial role of the development banks in reinforcing their commitments in support of common actions for climate and sustainable and merely inclusive development. Unfortunately, the pandemic has caught all of us off guard, posing severe challenges, and the whole world is struggling with the impacts of the COVID-19. However, as the international development finance community, we believe that we are getting even much more mindful of the need to accelerate our efforts to work together for a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive future. As we all know, the gender inequality, unfortunately, affects mainly the woman in a way that group is becoming even much more vulnerable to the changes, varying from many aspects, but mainly the climate even. And we've been, as I'm trying to say, we are all witnessing the hazardous effects of the climate change, and women, as discussed, have been disproportionately, unfortunately, negatively affected by the situation. So today, we believe as the counterparties together have a key role in playing to support an inclusive and green recovery, especially after the post-COVID era. And from our point of view, gender equality should be one of the main areas that we should focus on. As we all know, many of the climate-related SDGs include indeed gender-specific targets. For instance, on ownership and control over land and access to new technology, SDG 1. Women's small-scale food producers, SDG 2. And water and sanitation, SDG 6. Last but not least, SDG 13 on combating climate change and its impact calls specifically for the promotion of mechanisms for raising capacity for effective climate change-related planning and management in least developed countries, including focusing on women. So that's quite deliberate from our point of view. We are ready to play our role, and as today it's going to be discussed the core relationship between climate change and climate-related risks and gender equality. Within this wide international community, I would like to state that as AFD, Agence France de Développement, BISE, DBSA, and TSKB, we are part of IDFC International Development Finance Club, which is a network of 26 national, regional, and bilateral development banks. And we've been founded in 10 years ago. We are this year celebrating our 10th year anniversary. And IDFC members are working closely together to implement the SDGs to happen and Paris Agreement agenda, and get together their forces as a platform to promote and leverage sustainable development investment worldwide. In this regard, IDFC members work to harmonize financial actors' tools and practices to better take into account sustainability concepts, mainly, as we will be discussing today, gender and climate. And within this perspective, as IDFC, in order to deepen our knowledge to what extent and how gender equality is being addressed in IDFC members' practices, we've been conducting a consultant study where we aim to identify the external practices of IDFC members in terms of gender equality and focus on how we could scale up our efforts and improve our collective impact commitment on gender equality in the coming important period, let's say. And as organizers of this event, namely on behalf of Agence France de Développement, BISE and TSKB, we would like to thank you for your time to all the speakers and the audience at the panel titled Gender and Climate Nexus within the Perspective of Development Banking, which is being held at the IDFC pavilion today. So the floor is yours. I'm sure that it's going to be a very fruitful event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meral, for your opening speech. And I guess we are ready to detail how it's going to work. We're going to stay about 1 hour and a half within different exchanges. We started a few minutes ago. The idea was first to have a first roundtable about the existing toolkits. Unfortunately, we have got a change of plans. There's one speaker that is not coming, but we'll go directly to the second panel about the discussion among PDBs, the public development banks, on how they mainstream gender and climate change. So for this panel, I will start with my colleague, Ms. Teliska Pesenti, who is the AFD's Adaptation Facility Deputy Project Manager for the Indian Ocean and Gulf of Guinea. She's holding a degree in international relations and development economics. She worked for more than 5 years within the Southern civil society organizations, as well as multi and bilateral organizations, and especially on governance and climate change. So my question to Teliska is, taking into account the fact that the AFD is a feminist agency, could you give us an example of what it concretely means to mainstream gender into climate initiatives through your experience in the project Adaptation? And thank you very much. We have a PowerPoint presentation as well that is going on for Teliska's presentation. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Mar. And thank you to TSKB and IDFC for this opportunity to share adaptation facility experience on this climate and gender nexus. I don't know if my slides are showing. Okay. Great. So we can directly go to the next slide. Thank you. So of course, sorry. Of course, integration of gender into climate action is necessary, and this for two main reasons. There are gender-specific vulnerabilities to the impact of climate change that need to be assessed in order to be addressed through climate-sensitive adaptation solutions. These gender vulnerabilities depend on many contextual variables, being distribution of domestic roles, distribution of productive roles, imbalances in the access to resources such as finance, climate information, insurance, and so on. So without this gender-specific analysis, there is a risk that 50% of the population could be inefficiently impacted by projects, or even more than 50% actually, since gender analysis also concerns men. So this analysis is really important. The second reason is to support women empowerment and leadership in the definition, implementation, and monitoring of climate action. So from their households to their communities and political institutions, women are key actors that can drive change. Again, if women are not involved, this means depriving climate action from 50% of its available forces. So climate finance, in this sense, is an opportunity to advance gender equality. On the opposite, gender insensitive climate finance could drive important lock-in effects, perpetuating structural inequalities. So AFD is a feminist agency in line with the French feminist diplomacy. And of course, this applies internally, but externally as well, through advocacy activities and with 100% of our projects being gender scanned using the DAC gender markers. So the Gender Climate Nexus is a priority for AFD, and in fact, I can announce that a €5 million project to fund grassroots ecofeminist African organizations has been presented to our board this semester. But I want to talk a bit more in details about a concrete experience on what this Gender Climate Nexus means through the adaptation program. So I'm going to wait a minute. A word about adaptation. It is a technical assistance and capacity building program from the AFD, which has been supporting partner countries and regional organizations in their climate resilient trajectories through support to their climate governance, their sectoral policies, and preparation of resilient investments since 2017. So for adaptation, an important first step to mainstream gender was to internally mainstream gender into the project structure. So this was done in several ways. First, the team's capacity were built on this specific interrelated gender and climate issues. Then gender expertise was included in the project. First in the project team with our colleague, our gender and climate focal points in the social and environmental department of the AFD being formally integrated into the project team. And she's been bringing sustained support to integrating gender into activities terms of reference and in providing quality control to on deliverables specifically on gender. And the gender expertise was included in the consultants teams that have been implementing the project's activities. So of 500 experts recruited under adaptation, 34 were gender experts. And it is to be noted that requesting this expertise also has a mainstreaming effect towards consulting companies that work with adaptation. There are still some challenges that are met with recruiting this expertise. So first, only 7 of these 34 gender experts were both climate and gender experts. So there is still this niche expertise to be developed. And there is also a need to ensure sound collaboration between gender and climate experts. It is also to be noted that women are underrepresented in the recruited expertise. So 30% of, sorry, did I get the numbers right? Yes, 30% in total of the recruited experts under adaptation are women, and the figure falls to 8% when speaking about national women experts. So this gender and geographic balance is, however, better for gender experts, with women representing 85% of the gender expertise, and national women experts 35% of the gender expertise. And this national expertise is really important, as a sound knowledge of the context is needed to evaluate gender-based vulnerabilities. Then transversal integration of gender issues was ensured into the theory of change of the new adaptation program. So adaptation has actually entered yesterday on this very pavilion, a new phase with 15 million euro, 15 million additional euro for the program over the next 4 years. So a theory of change was designed for the new phase of this new phase of the program, which you can see on the screen. So it is quite a dense slide. So let me explain it a bit. So you can see at the bottom the activities, the project activities that are going to revolve around the necessities of understanding, planning, and investing in adaptation, with 2 transversal components on knowledge management and, of course, gender equality and social inclusion. And these activities will activate enablers that are at the outcome level, that revolve around stakeholder, public policies, financing, and again, gender equality and social inclusion. And these enablers will drive our specific objective, which is to that decision makers are able to define and operationalize resilient and inclusive development trajectories for their territories, to reach the final objective of having the most vulnerable population and ecosystems resilient to climate change impacts. So what does it mean that this theory of change, that gender was mainstreamed into this theory of change? Well, it means that that gender analysis will be systematized into every project activity, that women's inclusion into participative activities will be controlled, and most importantly, that specific activities on gender will be implemented in the different project components. For example, support to the national implementation of the UNFCCC's Gender Action Plan, capacity strengthening and awareness raising on gender and climate, support to women academics from the South, research projects on gender-related vulnerabilities, technical assistance for gender-sensitive budgeting, or integration of women into climate governance structures. And all this is formalized in the Adaptation Gender Action Plan, and will be monitored through a monitoring and evaluation system in which gender is also to be mainstreamed. Oh, sorry. So, just to give you a quick example of what this internal mainstreaming of gender has allowed externally in terms of results. I wanted to show you an example from a vulnerability and feasibility study that is being conducted in Madagascar for an agricultural resilience and forest conservation project. So under this study, a specific analysis on social and gender vulnerabilities was conducted with a specific report on these issues. And different focus groups were organized with men and women under the study, during which interesting tools were used that I would like to show you. So the first tool that you can see on the screen was built with the participants from the village. The villages where the field study was conducted, it describes a typical day for women and men in this region of Madagascar. And you can see that women spend more time than men on productive and reproductive activities, leaving them with low resting and leisure time. Women have 8 hours a day to rest and to rest, while men have 14 hours on average. So this needs to be taken into account when assessing vulnerabilities. If climate change impacts induce more time spent by women in water collection, for example, or on the specific agricultural activities they carry, the impact on their living conditions could be significant. These time constraints must also be considered when designing the project's women engagement modalities. Another tool that was used during this study, well, again, the screen is quite dense, but it is a gendered agricultural calendar. And the blue area that you see on the screen are activities conducted by women during the year. So you can see that the activities they conduct are more spread than men activities. And this allows men to seasonally migrate, this being both a factor of vulnerability and resilience for men and women. So again, this has to be taken into account in the analysis. And just to conclude on a financial figure, because it speaks volumes, of 7 projects that were supported in their feasibility study by Adaptation, and that already have internally been validated by the AFD. Well, 5 of them are CAD 1 according to the OECD criteria, meaning that they have a significant gender equality objective, and 1 is CAD 2, meaning that the project couldn't exist without gender considerations. So this total leverage effect on the, gendered climate finance amounts already for Adaptation to 534 million euro. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Taliska. Thank you very much for this very concrete presentation on the gender mainstreaming at Adaptation. I then have as a main point into your speech that it is completely essential that we privilege participation of women as experts into climate conversations, that's for sure, but as well as gender and climate experts, and that both expertise are not very common, and it's absolutely important in order to make sure that we have this conversation open in all the projects, as well as it is completely essential for participation and influence that we take into consideration the gender time. You can go. Thank you very much, Catherine. And another big or important idea that you raised is that we can have, and we can definitely have, a concrete gender mainstreaming project in the field and in the ground through a very detailed theory of change that you explained, and we can of course, work on the whole project, taking into account each of the initiatives and each of the contexts. So thank you very much for this explanation. Maybe we'll get back for another example in Senegal. Let's see if we have some time for that. And I will let Catherine install in the little by little, no problem. I will give the floor to our next speaker online, Miss Paola Nicole Clery. Let me first introduce her, and then I will have a quick another question for her. So Miss Clery is Head of International Relations at the BICE, the Argentinian Banco de Inversión y Comercio Exterior. She's in charge of relationships of foreign institutions, regional and global initiatives, and she supervises the development, implementation, and monitoring of sustainable strategy in BICE. Her previous experiences were in technology, education, and sports. She was a senior manager for mobile phone development, manager of international relations in the football club of Villas Unidas, as well as a policy advisor for education in the Argentinian Industrial Union. So my question to Paola is, how does BICE mainstream gender in its access to finance in the climate sector? And maybe as well, if we have some time, what are BICE's next steps regarding the gender and climate agenda? And thank you very much, Paola.
Hi, thank you. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate on this panel. And I'm going to apologize in advance for my poor English. You know, it's 7 a.m. in the morning here in Argentina, so it seems to get really worse in the mornings. So, you know, we have been hearing all this past week about the direct relation between the effects of climate change and poverty. And to be honest, you know, the most vulnerable populations have been suffering or supporting the heaviest weight of the impact of climate change. And we can clearly observe that in Latin America. We have seen food insecurity, rising prices of food, loss of income, loss of livelihood activities, the impact of health and displacement. And our region, Latin America, continues to be the most unequal region in the world, and has been the developing region most affected by COVID as well. And during 2020, CEPAL's data tells us that the economy contracted by 6.8%, and although it's expected to bounce back this year around 5.5%, the region shows structural inequality, which increased in Gini's index by 2.9%. Food insecurity reached 40% of the population, which is 6.5 more than in 2019, which I think is leaving more and more people in a most vulnerable population and more vulnerable to climate change. As we also have been seeing in the past weeks, action against climate change can reinforce or exacerbate these inequalities, or intentionally aim to overcome them. That's why we're here. I think. So if we continue on the same path, even if we increase funding against global warming, it will not guarantee an equal distribution between developed and developing nations and between men, women, and the LGBTQ+ community. You know, in Argentina, I wanted to give you a little bit of background, but in Argentina, bank loans for the private sector represents today 9% of the GDP, which is extremely low. You know, the average for Europe for 2020 was 92%. And even if we compare it to other Latin American countries, the average for Latin America is 55% of the GDPs. And we have countries that are above that average, like Chile, which almost 90%, or Brazil, 70%, or Costa Rica with 60%. From that 9% of the loans to the private sector here in Argentina, only 4% corresponds to businesses. The rest are to individuals, and they're mostly for consumption. And from that 9%, only 1.8% are for small and medium enterprises. So you can see, not even talking about green finances, it is problematic to find funding in Argentina for small and medium enterprises. From Observatorio PYME, which is a think tank here in Argentina, 60% of the SMEs, also they established that 60% of the SMEs in the country did not access funding from the financial system. This is even pre-pandemic data. So you can see that we are having a really big gap in funding. And as well, if we are talking about the biases, like there is a lot of biases in the current financial structures. And the financial gender gap in Argentina is huge. 20% of the business is led by women, use bank loans to finance their investment against 43% of businesses led by men. And it's even worse. Rejected loan rates is 42% for women and only 2.5% for men. So as we can see, women are not automatically included in the financial system, and will not be included automatically in smart value chains as well, unless we have specific programs to incentivize them, like training to master new skills or find access to the financial market and working capital. Now, from BICE, we don't want women and girls to be lagging behind, as in the old economy. So we have seen a lot of successful entrepreneurs out there, women entrepreneurs, and we want their businesses to scale up, to thrive, and that's why we are integrating the gender perspective into structuring of our climate change finances. From ISE, we have been setting quotas for green loans, but we have also been providing non-financial services. We can foster inclusion. This is like clustering women-led businesses or training. We have started our own path towards establishing a gender-responsive climate financing mechanism. However, the goal is to ensure participation of women in all decision-making aspects of the climate-related finances. And in fact, this is for our almost 30 years of history, this is the first time BICE's board of director has two board members that are women, and which represents really only 25% of the board. But we think that this is the first step towards the right direction. Another thing that we are actually doing is attacking culture. As I said, as I mentioned before, rejection loans, and this is for the whole financial system, but the rejection loans for women are really high. So we want to create a cultural change inside BICE. And so we have established, of all our staff had undergone a training of awareness program on gender inclusion. And this was part of a national program where all the staff, all the national employees from the government had gone through this training. But here in the bank, we really went through that. Everybody had to go through it. Additionally, we want to, one of our main goals, as a development bank, is also to strengthen the participation of women in the private sector. So we have established a credit line called Mujeres que Lideran, or Women That Lead, which promotes small SMEs owned by women, or that had women in the board of directors or senior management. This is a very comprehensive program, and it has both financial and non-financial products. We are at BICE revising the whole structure of our finances to include funding against climate change. We can identify and address long-standing gender inequalities. And in fact, all financial decisions must consider climate change, and financial flows must be coherent with the horizon of low greenhouse emissions, which is not possible if we are excluding half of our population. But in order to do this, public banks in developing countries, we need to access financial resources with competitive interest rate and longer repayment periods, which can make a big difference when dealing with the cost of adaptation. I wanted to quote the president of Argentina. He was here at COP26 last week, and he mentioned to advance on the agenda for necessary transformations, we must create innovative sources of financing and a new global rules and incentives. He proposed working on a roadmap on how to mobilize necessary resources, recognizing the principle of shared but differentiated responsibilities, considering the indebtedness and structural constraints, as well as the social welfare needs. We know this is a very challenging agenda, and that requires us to be creative and innovative. This type of discussion here, that's why we really thank you this space, because I think this kind of discussion with our colleagues from other development banks around the world and other agencies and other institutions are really very important. We need to share these experiences and gain from the best practices. We don't have time to relearn everything. And we are looking forward for expanding our cooperation and learning from one another. I think these kind of conversations are really important, and I thank you very much.
Paula, thank you very much for your speech. I really believe that the roadmap that the Argentinian president mentioned is a very challenging one, and it might be a guiding principle for all of us. And indeed, it's completely important that we try to find and identify resources in order to make sure we have more innovative financing. And you also mentioned, and very quickly on that, the project Mujeres que Lideran. I don't know if you can maybe dig a bit more on what are the main benefits of your credit line, this credit line that is going into these financial and non-financial resources.
Yes, sure. So this initiative mostly aims to women's inclusion and empowerment, and it has two pillars. One is access to finance through a specific credit line, and also it's offering training and clustering of women. You know, this is in difference to other credit lines that we have. We finance up to 100% of investment programs, investment projects, while other lines are only up to 80%. And it also has flexibility in terms of payments and credit lines, and allows a grace period to pay up for up to 24 months. In terms of training, we have a Comunidad Vice, which is like a community where we offer trainings for women. It's in general, it's open to everybody, but we are focusing on what women are needed. Like we did a study with IDB. Actually, IDB did a study. We presented it together, and it actually showed the difficulties on gender, or the difficulties on gender on the financial system. And most women were saying that the products were not actually built for women, or the financial products were not actually built for women. So we are building up on that, and this credit line, it actually tags on this, and we are trying to improve it. And we are actually trying to offer what women entrepreneurs and women business women are looking out there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I don't know if you want to elaborate a bit more on what will be the solutions, but maybe we can do another round afterwards if we have some times after it. Okay, let me then turn to our speakers here in the audience. We have got Catherine Kaufman from the Development Bank of South Africa that has joined us. Thank you very much for coming, Catherine. You are the Group Executive for Project Cooperation in DBSA since 2021. You have a very important experience in banks such as Arthur & Andersen, the Nedbank Corporate and Investment Bank, as well as the Pan-African Infrastructure Fund. And you're a qualified attorney and project finance investment bank with more than 20-year legal, commercial, and financial service experience. I have a question for you, Catherine. What is the relevance of gender mainstreaming in climate risk mitigation strategies? What do you think about it? Maybe can you elaborate a bit about what we have seen in the other previous banks, such as BICE right now, for instance, or AFD? How it does apply in DBSA? And thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be part of the panel. I apologize for being late and that I missed your talk. So I think from a DBSA perspective, I'll speak from a personal as well as the development bank perspective. Personally, I think it's important that we must acknowledge that female participation in the mainstream economy, female participation in being the solution for climate risk mitigation and adaptation strategies is quite pivotal. And I'd like us to challenge our perspective of seeing gender or women as victims of their circumstances, which is how we've been typically been portrayed. I've been walking the earth for more than 5 decades. I've met women of many walks of life. and they've been the mainstay of sustainability, and they've been extremely important in enabling economic participation and economic progress within communities. So I think that's the starting point that we must start from, that we are already quite empowered. It's just that we've been disenfranchised in various ways. We will not point to the many in the room, but we've been disenfranchised in a number of ways systematically over time, and as a consequence of that, have not been part of the conversation in the room that would facilitate successful strategies and enabling strategies to deal with climate risk mitigation and adaptation. From a DBSA perspective, we recognize that manifests in two ways. In rural areas, for instance, we know that much like COVID, the impact of climate change has shined a spotlight on those people most vulnerable to its consequences. Unfortunately, women makes up a large component of that. In many ways, women tend to be, especially in rural areas, tend to be leading agricultural production. They tend to be the ones that are pivotal in managing co-ops, but voiceless nonetheless. So when we have climate change impact, such as drought or flooding, and which affects yield of products, and which also affects displacement of communities from their land, it's the women that are probably most affected in that instance. So we need to do more to reverse that situation, where women not only have the ability to be in the conversation on how to solve those problems, but also have access to capital to solve the problem. Worldwide, it's a problem. It's not only a problem in our part of the world. Worldwide, it's a problem that women don't have access to capital. They don't have balance sheet. They don't have collateral security to provide against debt for various reasons. And quite strangely, women have quite a high degree of debt morality. We feel quite guilty about not paying loans. So it makes sense that we should be part of the conversation. There should be a gender lens when we look at formulating and designing climate risk mitigation strategies, frameworks, various initiatives, as well as budgeting and investment around that. At the DBSA specifically, we must acknowledge that it's been incidental how we've addressed gender investment in the bank. Our mandate is primarily to provide access to development finance, and we do that through investment in social infrastructure. So our core mandate is infrastructure investment. And to be honest with you, I think we are catching up in that respect. We've done it on an incidental basis. However, about 2 years ago, our board, the DBSA board, which is an independent board, approved our gender mainstreaming policy. It's been very well received by the board, EXCO, management and staff. And really it looked at 4 pillars of how we're going to approach and make inroads into gender mainstreaming. It's investing, capacity building, partnerships, can't remember the other one, but it'll come to me. But our focus, we've been very good at most of them except investing. Our pipeline has developed to address that, both our banked pipeline as well as our pipeline that's still being developed has done a lot to address that. And policy is important. So, for instance, the Renewable Energy Program, which is highly successful in South Africa, has got some gender mainstreaming requirements, but in my opinion, they're quite weak. And I think as a development bank, nothing prevents us from making sure we optimize the criteria ourselves. I look after project preparation, as you mentioned, which means that we have an opportunity very early on in the process of developing projects to make it project preparation funding accessible based on gender mainstreaming criteria. And so I think that That is helping us a lot in terms of it being our corporate scorecard at the moment, but also at a divisional level in our business, it's a divisional KPI as well, key performance indicator. I think the other important thing is that we've learned is that we've had a lot of experience in developing local content funding models in South Africa, but based on our historic context, we've had a lot of experience, and so there's a lot of learnings that we can translate into funding gender mainstreaming. I'm encouraged to hear from my other colleagues from Argentina that, especially in the SME space, there's obviously products that we learn from them, as well as specific products just geared towards funding gender investments and gender developers, female developers. So collaboration is important, and in our own gender mainstreaming policy was benchmark of the AFDB, the AFD, SADC Women. So we learned from our colleagues, and we came up with something that, while it's now become embedded in the organization, we're always looking to improve ways, looking for ways to improve that. So my view is that from whether we're talking gender in the rural sense or in the boardroom, and there's more than enough empirical evidence that shows that entities that have gender representation at board level, at executive level, at senior management level, from a financial performance perspective, do much better than those that don't. So it makes sense from an economic perspective too. I know that's what people care about mostly, so it makes sense from that perspective too. So for me, I think the value of having these discussions is that I get to understand what our colleagues are doing, I get to learn from them, and I take it back to our jurisdictions in South Africa and the rest of the continent.
Catherine, thank you very much. Thank you for these very interesting highlights, both in the question of the importance of taking into account both the internal perspective within your board, the importance of gender mainstreaming within the strategy, for being very frank on the fact that, and I guess we all share the same point of view. Well, I can speak for AFD. Everybody is getting started on this nexus between gender and climate. We do have wonderful projects in the ground, but there are few ones. And it's important that we get into the conversation in order to learn from each other and see what are the others doing and what are the interesting initiatives in order to be and get inspired. So it's the importance of this mix between the internal and the external, the importance of the partnerships you also mentioned as well, the collaboration within each other, and this roundtable with four, and I'm going to our fourth panelist within 4 different countries, 4 complete different areas of context, are quite inspiring in order to make sure that we have this collective aim to get this nexus succeed. And I also take into consideration your first highlight on the importance of making sure that we do not fall into victimism, that we are already empowered, and that's a very important thing you mentioned. The problem is we are not in the conversation. And this is something that Teliska also mentioned, the importance of the participation of women into an influence of women in all the conversation on climate change, and making sure that we also have this specific expertise that combines both gender and climate. So, well, with that in mind, and thank you for that, I can turn to our 4th panelist online. Thank you, Jian Uran, who serves as manager in the Turkish bank, TSKB economic research team. He develops content for the gender working group in TSKB that was formed to follow up development on gender issues, plans, and carries out action and potential projects that TSKB can undertake both within and outside the company. The other topics he has worked during his 10-year experience are climate change, of course, youth employment, sustainable cities, health policies, and competitiveness. Well, Gian, I have two questions for you. The first one is, how are women-led client solutions different? And the second one is, how can PDBs support and accelerate innovative climate solutions while applying, of course, a gender lens? So the floor is yours, Gian. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mar. Thank you for raising this important question about gender impacts of climate change. And also, I'd like to thank the other speakers. It was really great to learn other countries' examples. It's really important. So, and also I'd like to thank the IDFC and my colleagues for the kind invitation to this event with participation of many policymakers, experts, and professionals around all over the world playing a crucial role in tackling climate change as a gendered issue. And today I'm delighted to take part in this session to discuss on the vital role of development banks in the green recovery and the need of women's leadership to develop climate resilient solutions. And also on behalf of the Industrial Development Bank of Turkey, I'm thrilled to share our efforts in this matter in order to ensure that gender issues are integrated into environmental policies. So I'd like to begin with the crucial role of development banks, DBs, in ensuring that the recovery is a green one. DBs, with their core mandates to promote economic growth through their financing, risk sharing, and supportive activities, have been assigned a key role in supporting the achievement of the SDGs and implementation of the Paris Agreement agendas. DBs are uniquely positioned to play a leading role this transformation by providing concessional finance where it's most needed and leveraging private finance for a shift of the whole financial system. DBs also are encouraged to be pioneer to develop tools to eliminate barriers to sustainable investments with the objective of promoting private sector investment in climate. It's highly notable that DBs have started to engage more in financing the transition towards a low carbon economy. Last year, the climate funds provided by a group of multilateral development banks reached a record $66 billion. And arguably, climate change represents one of our most complex challenges of our time. Therefore, it requires proactive and also holistic responses. Moving from gender blind to gender transformative environmental policies is an urgent action to adapt to changing environmental conditions and to come up with practical solutions. Applying a gender lens to climate action will not only address the inequality issue, but also accelerate progress in mitigating climate change and adapting to it. Attention to gender and changing climate has increased progressively over the last decades. Much of the recent studies is focusing on the nature of women's work, which is being used to justify placing women at the center of climate change policy. Identifying these differences is an essential and important component of any forthcoming attempts to address the gender issues in a changing climate. That's why we need more women leadership effectiveness in climate change adaptation and mitigation to make real difference. Utilizing the knowledge and capability of women presents an important opportunity to develop effective climate change solutions which benefit us all. However, women typically have less resources than men to prepare for and adapt to climate change. Therefore, they cannot easily diversify their livelihoods without adequate financial capital and access to technologies. Another pressing issue is, unfortunately, low female participation in the workforce is a global phenomenon, and it restricts solutions for climate change mitigation. With women all over the world facing more diverse challenges and against the backdrop of a worsening climate crisis, the low participation of women in economic as well as social life represents a threat both the economic security of nations and their overall economic progress. Let me share some of the figures which demonstrate the challenging environment for women face. According to the Green Policy Platform, globally, women make up 40% of the workforce in the agricultural sector, but hold only 23% of agribusiness management positions and comprise a mere 5.4% of entrepreneurs. Therefore, acknowledging the tendency for labor force participation rates to be massively lower for women than for men, and placing this issue on the agenda is an extremely pressing concern. By removing barriers to labor market opportunities and ensuring that women are unconstrained in the economic contribution they can provide, women can play a more active role in shaping global climate action and will have a vital part in disseminating the mindset required to embrace the values of climate and environmental responsive innovation. As green technology increasingly comes under the spotlight, the introduction of new technologies has accelerated the rise in productivity at the expense of the number of jobs, nudging an overqualified labor force to work in low-skilled jobs in the digitalized work environment. Education and training for women can address skill shortages and ensure women benefit from new and changing decent jobs in the transition to net zero. The ILO study, Skills for Green Sectors, concludes that in the absence of policy interventions, the energy transition will likely create more employment opportunities for men than for women. Transitioning to job opportunities that will be available in green sectors will require significant upskilling for women currently in low-paid and low-skilled jobs. Solutions include investing in STEM skills for women, challenging social norms that perpetuate occupational segregation, and ensuring women are protected from violence, exploitation, and harassment. So, on the international climate policy stage, the positive impact women can have on their environment and on the SDGs has generated widespread demand for more inclusive climate action, as well as gender-sensitive financing channels. So, it's obvious links between gender and climate change are nonetheless gaining greater recognition. Gender-smart climate finance can help improve climate and business outcomes. While applying a gender lens to climate finance is increasingly recognized as key to effective climate outcomes, it remains challenging for women to participate in climate finance processes or access funds. Therefore, environmental funds should be more gender equality focused, but have use of policies addressing multiple issues, mainly systematic inequalities in unpaid care, employment rates, pensions, income, poverty, and wealth. And as a result, development banks are demanding inclusive and gender-sensitive approaches that demonstrate how climate finance can be channeled to achieve a greater impact. As currently structured, climate action poses a significant challenge for women, but we should all be aware of that it also represents an opportunity. Having said that, DBs engaged in crafting plans to combat climate change must apply a gender lens to everything they do. Promote female leadership as a key part of the solution for the climate change crisis through targeted financing of women-owned and women-led climate-positive businesses and initiatives. Taking targeted coherent actions at both national and international levels and allocated financial resources to the right channels with the aim of strengthening gender policies will improve the ability to generate effective solutions to ongoing fundamental inequalities. DBs that focused on a green and inclusive recovery and structural transformation are even more important now than they were before the pandemic. In achieving these goals, development banks will need to step up their pioneering role in climate finance and develop more innovative approaches to pave the way for flexible and less risky financing for less developed countries. It's also crucial for development banks to continue their efforts to enhance international cooperation in unlocking new sources of gender, and green finance for investments in the SDGs. Moreover, DBs can play an important role in incentivizing the design and the implementation of comprehensive quantification methods and systematic collection of data on climate finance, particularly for private actors to move forward with the required low carbon investments. So what about TSKB? What are we doing at the Industrial Development Bank of Turkey to empower women and foster gender mainstreaming climate change? Gender equality is an integral part of TSKB's organizational strategy, and one of its focus areas in supporting Turkey's sustainable and inclusive development. TSKB offers gender equality themed loans in cooperation with development finance institutions, where the funds are extended to companies which observe gender equality in the working environment and support women's employment. In 2016, TSKB provided funding from the Agence Française de Développement with the topic of women employment to finance investments by firms which observe gender equality in the working environment and support women's employment. And to measure the impacts clearly, a dedicated assessment tool was designed for this credit line, which incorporates numerous aspects of gender equality, including eliminating gender-based pay gaps, women's role in decision-making processes, the work-life balance, women's access to non-traditional jobs, sexual harassment at work, and etc. And with a similar methodology, in 2018, TSKB obtained funds to support women employment from World Bank, further to the impacts generated during the very first credit line. At the end of last year, more than 1,500 women had been provided with employment opportunities through the projects funded under the theme of gender equality and women's employment. TSKB is also a member of national and international initiatives which carry out studies on gender equality and also plays active role in a number of working groups, such as the IDFC Gender Equality Working Group. Last year, November, in addition to the Finance in Common Summit Joint Declaration, a statement on gender equality and women's empowerment was signed by voluntary development banks. Moreover, economic research team of TSKB is actively engaged in thematic research on gender equality. In addition to thematic reports, TSKB economic research team publishes articles on gender equality covering multi-challenges faced by women both at home, in public and at workplace, and how development banking could address such challenges. Finally, as part of its advisor services, TSKB provides guidance to businesses to align their corporate strategies within gender equality perspective. While raising awareness of gender equality at the public level, this guidance contributes to the establishments by the firm of effective communication and cooperation with public institutions, NGOs, and financial institutions. I have more to summarize on the subject, but I will stop here. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Rian, thank you. Thank you very much for the description of the challenges you have raised. I take these important highlights you made of the importance of women leadership on adaptation and mitigation, the importance that we need to challenge social norms in order to make sure that we continue to work on gender equality and not only on participation of women, which are of course essential, but it's not the only thing. We might resume and sum up the nexus of gender equality. And you have also pointed the importance of the less access to resources that women most of the time do have, as well as, of course, the presentation of the challenges you are facing within TSKB. And you are undergoing on this gender working group. Maybe we have time for a second round of questions. If in the audience you do have some questions, do not hesitate to raise your hand. And maybe I do have some other questions for the panelists. Teliska, you were mentioning some examples in the ground within Adapt Action. I know you have very interesting experiences in Senegal. I don't know if you may illustrate them as well as you have done so for Madagascar.
Yes, sure. So speaking of, as you said, results on what is adaptation doing on gender? A study is currently being conducted in Senegal to ensure the elaboration of a capacity development strategy at the national level to ensure low carbon and resilient development through primary, secondary, and higher education, as well as vocational training. So the study is still ongoing, but we already have first results from the assessment phase of the study. And a transversal gender approach was adopted with a specific deliverable that is still to be produced, but there will be a specific deliverable on how gender, what are the gendered vulnerabilities in the education sector, and how this must be addressed to ensure women's participation into this resilient and low carbon transition. So a few of the of findings that were already highlighted during the study are first that the current situation demonstrates an imbalance in women's access to education that is more and more important the higher the education level. So girls and boys are more or less in equal numbers in primary education. When we go to higher education, the figure falls to 43% of girls, and it falls to 43% in higher education and 33% for PhD candidates. So this applies generally to education in Senegal, but it has a particular meaning for climate, for resilient and low carbon transition, as women are less, they have less chance to be in decision-making positions in this transition. We also see an imbalance in the way women are represented in scientific and technical and industrial fields, which is again has a particular impact on their involvement in the resilient and low carbon transition, as these technical and industrial fields are particularly important to ensure energy transition, building efficiency, and so on. So to give some figures, 1/3 of high school students following a science curriculum are women. Women are 38% in vocational and technical and industrial training, and 17% of natural science PhD candidates are women. So we see that these figures are low, and it is a challenge that needs to be addressed. We can also note that it is an issue, this low representation of women in technical and industrial fields. We must, however, not dismiss the fact that women must also be represented in social sciences and political sciences, and that these fields are very important too for this resilient and low carbon transition that we are looking to. So women have to be represented in every field, and fields must not be discriminated against. They are all important, actually. So these stakes are being proactively addressed by the Senegalese government, for example, with the nomination of gender focal points in each educational facility. And efforts can be sustained in several ways. For example, campaigns to fight gender stereotypes can be implemented. Academic research on gender and climate can be promoted. Trainers' capacities on gender and climate issues can be built, and the girls' education can be promoted, as well as their inclusion in scientific and technical fields. Thank you.
Teliska, thank you very much. I guess we have another very concrete illustration of how in in a general project on adaptation, we can find ways to elaborate gender mainstreaming, in this case via education, and the importance of taking into account the segregation on the specialization between girls and boys, and that most of the time affect afterwards in their professional experiences, whether they are in scientific specializations or a more general one. You were mentioned some of them. So it's absolutely important to make sure that we do have this gender mainstreaming in all aspects. So thank you again for this very concrete example. Maybe, Paola, can we get back to the Mujeres que Lideran project that you mentioned earlier in your speech? What are you mentioned the study that you developed with IDB and the challenges you face on that. What are maybe your perspectives in order to try to solve them?
Well, thank you. I think that there is a lot of interesting things that were said here. And Catherine, one of the things that she mentioned is the two things that we need to do. One is internal, and Sihan, sorry, your name, I hope I pronounce it well. One of the things that we have to fight is internal, but another thing is external. So yes, so we have been seeing, as I mentioned, we have been seeing that women do not think that when we did the survey, when IDB did the survey, they said women didn't think that the products were in the financial system were made for them. And that was like a really hard percentage of women answering this. So one of the things that we have to look internally is how to mainstream gender in all our credit lines. And this is something that we are trying to do, we are doing now. We are developing, and thank you, and this is thanks to AFD, which has been really helpful in terms of mainstreaming gender with a technical cooperation. We are developing a gender strategy in the bank, and this is something that is going right now. Also, we have been it has been really helpful, our participation in IDFC, because we also participate on a study by the Frankfurt School, and all this gender experience from other banks, I think that is really important. We don't have time to learn, and we don't have time to make mistakes. This is something that is an issue that is really present right now, climate change, and how we can actually mainstream gender into it, and we can include women in this new change. I think that this is something important. And as well, when we're talking, when we're seeing what we have to do outside, I think that this is something that as a development bank, we really have to take part on this agenda and lead this agenda in the rest of the financial system. For MBICE, we are a very active player in a special group of women directors from public banks, which was organized by the Argentinian Central Bank. We are in the forefront of the Argentinian financial system to agree on a uniform taxonomy on how to identify women-owned enterprises, and now we are moving forward into how to create indicators to measure this. I think this is something we have seen it on the G20, on the W20 in Argentina. One of the main issues that came up there where there is not enough data. And when we don't have enough data, we cannot really, and this also came up in the last one in Rome. When we don't have enough data on gender, we cannot make really good policies on it. And think that knowing first is ideal. So this is something that we need to measure, and this is something that we are putting forward. Then we created as well, and this is an internal policy, but we created a gender and diversity committee, which some of the directors of the bank are participating. All the issues coming up on gender, they are discussed there, and this is a very open committee to everybody on the bank as well. I think that this is some of the lines we also have in terms of a credit line. We also have a GCF line, which it hasn't been like very active in the past years due to COVID, because mostly the financial needs of the companies were working capital. Now this credit line is on investment, But we are hoping that we are going to move forward now. This is now being offered in our local currency, which makes it as well better for our companies or for the companies in Argentina to access it. Or I think that that's something really, really important. And additionally, I want to mention this, that each of these credit lines, even GCF, AFB, the World Bank, they all have technical cooperations. And the focus has been on gender and climate. And I think that's really helping us to, we are a very small bank in Argentina. We are a very small development bank. So this is helping us to adequate to this new world. And I think that it's really important for us to address both gender and climate change.
Paula, thank you. Thank you very much for your different keynotes, both on the importance of partnerships again and on internal commitments. I also have another new highlights of the question of data, of gender-sensitive data, in order to make sure that we have the whole picture of what is going on inside the bank and inside our respective countries. Maybe I quickly turn on to Catherine. Very quickly to say, if you want to add something else on the challenges you're facing internally in order to develop a more gender mainstreaming into the infrastructure projects. You mentioned that you started the work on this field. How do you foresee the next steps?
I'm quite optimistic. I think that from the concessional funding that comes through GCF and GEF, gender mainstreaming has been followed quite religiously in the bank. So it was really about making sure that that translates to the rest of the institution in terms of everything that we do, that it becomes sort of our DNA and how we fund and how we invest. So I'm quite encouraged, and it has been, our approach has been quite robust. You know, we ask the right questions in investment committees, and we send projects back if they don't meet certain requirements. So from that perspective, there's solid buy-in. For me, the things that are exciting to hear are what I can learn from my colleagues, and the conversations that we can have around what they're doing and compare notes. Data, technology, data analytics is a very important part of not only monitoring how well we're doing or how poorly we're doing, but also in terms of what we should be doing next and how we should pivot in our initiatives to have more of an impact. So for me, that's sort of the next phase, is how do we utilize data and data analytics to optimize the processes that we've started.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And finally, I will turn to Gian. And I have the same question for you. What are the next challenges and next steps for inside TSKB? And of course, as a coordinator of the gender working group within IDFC, if you want to have some elements on this aspect as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'd like to say, despite gender equality and climate change receiving a lot of attention as a result of corporate diversity disclosures, gender lens investing, climate investing is still an early stage compared to other more developed sustainable investing themes in Turkey, I must say. While gender lens investing is expected to continue its rapid growth in the coming years, financing towards gender option could be scaled up significantly. And also, like my colleagues, my friend says, the gender indicators should be integrated in all sustainable instruments, and data collection is the key part of it here. Thank you.
Okay, I think we all agree on the importance of data collection in this case, and it was a very, very important new highlight. Well, with this being said, I wanted to thank all the speakers in the audience and online. And before we have the official closure by our chair, Ms. Murathan from TSKB, I wanted to quickly wrap up what I have learned here during this event. Maybe as guiding principles, the importance to avoid general victimism for an instrumentalization of women in this general speech about the mainstreaming on gender and climate change. We might preserve, and that is something I would like to add, a rights-based approach. It's a very important aspect in order to remain and make sure that we change the gender social system we were talking about during this 1 hour and a half. And of course, also the importance to promote participation and influence. We all agreed on that, of women, to let them become agents of change. That's absolutely crucial. And we also agreed on the importance of some tools in order to develop it within our respective PDBs. Of course, the data availability, that's something absolutely crucial that needs to be gendered responsible and sensitive. Of course, the importance to mainstream into the whole process of the project. We saw a tool, very concrete tools such as a change system. Of course, the importance to have both internal and external practices, meaning by that we need to have the adherence of the board in our respective PDBs in order to develop a gender-specific strategy or policy, but at the same time we do need to have both priorities, both in the climate and the gender equality. And that applies to all our collaborations, all our partnerships, and this is the sense of this kind of events within the gender equality working group in IDFC. So maybe it can become, but maybe Ms. Murathan, you can develop a bit more on that guiding principles for our concrete work on the IDFC Gender Equality Working Group. And it is my opinion that they are very inspiring good practices that we can develop in this group coordinated by TSKB. And with that, I give you again the floor to Ms. Murathan in order to conclude. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Mar, for your kind consideration and running the event in a very smooth way. It was all a teaching experience for me as well, and in our capacity building process, as we all say. And again, it was very valuable for me listening to the experiences shared here today. And as we are from all separate parts of the world, South Africa, Latin America, Europe, Turkey, it was great witnessing that we've been working on the same agenda. We have been working on the gender empowerment specifically, while also addressing climate risks. And mainstreaming gender empowerment will indeed accelerate the impacts generated in an exponentially powered way, if we could put it that way. And that being said, we need more of a collaboration, even further in between public and private bodies, varying from financing opportunities to even data management. And the holistic and collaborative work through each organization, from our point of view, I think we will be all agreeing upon, should be about all individual preferences to refrain from any conflicts of interests. And we believe together that there is no time left to join forces together, neither in climate nor in gender empowerment. So we believe that social impact will be only gets even powerful through the collaborative approach in climate risk mitigations and adaptation policies as well. So in our path, the transparency and accountability should be also underlined, I suppose, and will be one of the key matters, of course, without curbing out the efforts of each counterpart. And indeed, those efforts will be supported through standardization, and it will also increase our impact in a correct path. And we believe that investors in private sector should be well educated through our efforts, through the public development banks and their missions, and encourage for the collaboration against climate change risks. And the cost of not acting today should be really well described in order for us to have a livable planet with a empowered gender population. And again, last but not least, reaching our net zero targets where explicitly keeping the global warming under 1.5 Celsius degree is solely possible through an inclusive approach, namely gender empowerment. I appreciate your time for listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.